Hello everyone, so today we're going to talk about why the high instruments generally sound drier than the low instruments when you send them to the same amount of reverb. So even within the same library. So here we got CSS, so we got some violins here, and then some basses and cello. So we just send all of them to the string bus, right? And it's being sent to reverb, but the same amount for all the instruments. But if you compare, they seem to be relatively the same wetness, but in context of the mix, the high stuff will always feel a bit more dry than the low stuff. And the thing is, it's perfectly normal, and sometimes you want that. You want to have that close detail on the violins. But I just want to let you know why that happens, and maybe in some situations you might want the high stuff to be kind of feel as wet as the low stuff, right? So the thing is, when it comes to reverb, natural whole reverb will always be rolled off because the laws of physics, right? High frequencies get absorbed faster than low frequencies. So what happens is that a whole reverb kind of has a spectrum like that, right? And that's the highs. So generally speaking, an instrument that has more lows and low mids will resonate and feel kind of wet around here. The reverb will enhance that part, but the reverb will not really be loud in the highs, right? The reverb, unless it's like a specific bright reverb, it will be quite rolled off naturally. So what happens is that if you have a violin with a tone of 6, 7, 8, 10K, well, that 10K is going to feel more dry because even if you send the same amount of reverb, that reverb is going to sure kind of reverberate the fundamental of the violin, but all the high kind of harsher harmonics would kind of stay drier. And also there is the fact that in an orchestral mix, there is more space in the highs, right? Because the way orchestral instruments work, because it's a big space and, you know, big rooms are like that, you get a lot of kind of build up naturally around there, around the mids, right? So around 1K here. Generally speaking, at least raw orchestral recordings, which are unprocessed, will typically have lots of frequencies around there, and then typically less lows and less highs. So what happens is that you tend to have less space. You tend to have more space in the very high frequencies. So you're going to have like a couple instruments in the very highs. So one high violin, one high trumpet ensemble, something like that. So there is just more space to hear detail in the highs as well compared to the mids. So for that reason, for all these reasons, the high instruments can feel a little bit dry. So if you want to really put them in the same kind of space, it can be a good idea to just boost the reverb on the high instruments. And a good thing is that it won't really create more mud because the low instruments, they won't really need more reverb because they will be buried among other things, right? So you won't really feel like they're dry, right? You wouldn't really feel like the cello here are dry in context of the mix. But if you have a very loud, let's say you have a situation where you have a very loud kind of solo violin or, you know, just like a high violin ensemble and it's very exposed, it can easily feel more dry. So don't hesitate. If you want, don't hesitate to send more reverb to the high stuff. Just a little bit more. So that in context. So if I just take these tracks here. So of course, this is quite dependent on how loud the high instrument is, because if it's louder, then the harshness would be heard more easily. If it's quieter, the fact that it's drier would be more, it wouldn't be heard as much. So it really depends on the mix, just how dense the mix is and a lot of factors. But this is just, so if you run into that situation, don't just raise the reverb on all the strings because the low strings might really not need it. And you might keep more articulation by avoiding drowning the low strings in more reverb, but try to target the stuff that's more cutting through the mix, right? So that way you just affect what's cutting through the mix. So I hope it was interesting, guys, and I will see you later. Cheers!